So when you are selling a home and buying another at the same time, it can be extremely stressful with all the moving parts you have in the transaction. One of those parts is the closing day. Like, how does that work? When do you pack up the stuff? When do you call the movers? When do you move out? When do you move in? How do all the puzzle pieces fit together? And that's what I'm going to shed some light on today. Selling a home, buying another in the same day is a little complicated, a lot of moving parts, but it happens all the time. It's very common. And in Massachusetts, the presumption is that the property is empty. So when the buyer is ready for closing day is upon us, the seller's documents are signed usually ahead of time. The buyer goes to the closing, signs the documents, the deed is recorded, the new deed is recorded, and as soon as it's recorded, they receive the keys. It is presumed that before the buyers go to closing, that all of the seller's belongings are out of the house. But so how does that work? How does that timeline work where the seller has to move all of their possessions out and they can't move them in until they actually own the second property? So they're kind of in limbo in between. So I'm going to give you 5 tips on how to make that happen and try to get things so that it makes sense and you can see a timeline so you can make plans to make this a smoother transition. The first tip is to move out 24 to 48 hours before the actual closing day. If your closing day is on a Wednesday, you want to schedule those movers to be at the property either Tuesday or Monday. And the reason you want that gap is because of when the closings will actually take place. You've got to be able to close on the sale of the first property in the morning and the purchase in the afternoon. So there's no time on the actual closing day to be able to move your things out, and you need to have that property empty before the buyers take possession. I typically recommend, if you can give yourself a little bit more time, not to do the day before, but the 2 days before, because sometimes things happen. Sometimes the moving trucks come and the truck isn't big enough, and now they can't fit everything into that one truck. Or maybe you discover you've got more stuff to get rid of than you realized. You've got to get to the dump run, or your brother Joe is going to come pick up the desk and he still needed to do that, and there's not enough room on the truck to bring it to the new house. Like, all these things sometimes will happen where you need a little extra time to make that, make everything cleaned up, have everything cleaned up for the closing. It also gives you a little bit of breathing room so that when that truck does pull out of the driveway, now you've got time to clean the property. In Massachusetts, broom swept condition is acceptable. You don't have to scrub the floors and scrub the toilets, but you do need to clean up dirt and trash and make it presentable for the new buyers. And having that extra time is sometimes, it definitely something give you a little bit more breathing room, kind of alleviates the stress. Now, tip number 2 is to plan to move in the day after closing. Now, because the closing is happening, your sale is happening first, then your buy is happening second. It's going to happen sometime in the afternoon. Typically, movers won't move you in at 4 or 5 o'clock at night in the dark at this time of year. So you're going to want to make sure that you schedule that for the following day. The other reason to do that is it gives you a chance to get in the house, maybe do some vacuuming, or you can bring some of the items that you didn't want the movers to take, some of your sensitive electronics and things of that nature. You can bring those things in first, but it gives you a little bit of breathing room. And it also, if there's a delay with the closings, if for some reason things out of our control, there's a delay with how the deeds are recorded, there's a backup at the registry and they don't get on record right away. As a result, you're not getting the keys to the house until 5 o'clock at night because we're not on record. It gives you that flexibility of time when those things happen. Tip number 3 is be prepared for delays. And regardless of how much we plan, and we have times and we have dates on the purchase and sale, and we have times scheduled for closing and times for final walkthroughs, sometimes things happen. If there's a lender involved, if it's not a cash transaction and there's a lender involved, we're at the mercy of the lending institution sending all the paperwork to the attorney. Massachusetts is an attorney state, which means the closing attorneys are the ones that we need to meet with to handle the transaction. So we've got a closing attorney on the sale, closing attorney on the purchase, those respective attorneys need to receive the documents, prepare the documents, have it ready for the buyer and seller to sign. And if that bank doesn't send the paperwork in a timely fashion, or if there's a last minute delay, it kind of throws the whole schedule out of whack. I think that building in that extra time, even though, moving your belongings out a day, 2 days early, and moving in a day after closing, yes, there are holding charges on a moving truck, or a rental truck if you're moving yourself. But I think that in the long run, it's far less impactful and stressful than to try to figure out, well, I've got this truck and they need to deliver, but I don't have access to the property. So what happens then? And now you're scrambling and trying to figure things out, and things can get a little sticky and dicey when things happen that you're not prepared for. Now, tip number 4 is to close on your sale the day before. So to move the timeline along, if the buyer and seller agree and allows you to stay in the property, we use what's called a use and occupancy agreement. And what that basically means is you sell your property on a Tuesday, you buy your next property on a Wednesday. What that will mean is if you sell the property on Tuesday, your stuff is still in the property or you're still staying there, then the buyer takes possession of that property on Tuesday and allows you to use that property. So the buyer has to agree to take possession and essentially assume you as a tenant for 24 hours. Whenever you're assuming the landlord position, there does bring in an element of risk. What if the closing goes sideways and now you're technically, in the eyes of the law, you're a landlord and you've got these tenants that you have to evict, meaning the old sellers. 99.9 times out of 10 it's fine, but there's always a chance. And for that reason, the attorneys will usually say they don't really like doing that. However, if you were to sell the property, not do a use and occupancy, say go into a hotel overnight, and do it that way, and so that you're moving, or if you have the ability to go stay with someone, if you have a relative or a friend that you can stay with, in the interim, that way it moves the timeline along. There's less things that can go wrong, and then you have the opportunity to possibly move in on the day of closing because you can close on your purchase earlier in the day. There's different mechanics there, and there are options depending on the flexibility of the buyer and seller for both transactions. And tip number 5 is to book your movers or your rental early. As soon as you have mortgage approval, as soon as you know that the buyers of your property have mortgage approval, you want to make sure that the movers are set up and scheduled. It is far easier to cancel than it is to schedule. And to have that, even if it's a financial loss, even if you lose a deposit on your cancellation, it's much better to go that route than to be scrambling to find a mover if it happens to fall during a super busy time of the year or a super busy time of the month. As soon as the mortgage commitment is had, book those movers, get it on the schedule, and then start packing. So those are a few tips on how to juggle selling and buying at the same time. If you'd like more information and would like a free ebook for buying or selling delivered to your inbox within minutes, please click the link below, and a seasonal guide for buying and selling will be sent to you right away. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.